Well, welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to have all of you join us to talk about a topic that has been in the news a lot and has been on the minds of many in the private sector for sure, and that is public-private partnerships and how the home building industry can participate in the growing interest by government to engage with the private sector to solve public needs. First, I'm going to go through a few things for your benefit. First, just by way of introduction, I'll share a brief outline on what public-private partnerships are, because oftentimes the term is used but misunderstood. And then I'm going to have a discussion about the home building industry specifically, what projects have been successfully executed by government entities around the country that are unique or could be unique to the home building industry, and some of the opportunities that exist that you might not think about in your industry that can absolutely benefit you and government using a P3 methodology. So first, what is a public-private partnership? Sometimes people believe that doing business with government, regardless of how that deal is structured, if they get a contract with government to build a building, they are engaged in a public-private partnership. And that is a statement that is made by both the private sector and public sector, but it is not the correct definition, and it is not consistent with the growing understanding of what a public-private partnership is. First, public-private partnerships are actually not new. Many people will tell you that in Europe and in Canada and many other parts of the world, public-private partnerships have been a growing way to address both what are referred to as infrastructure projects, roads, water and sewer infrastructure, etc., and those projects that are typically referred to as social infrastructure projects, which include hospitals, dormitories, convention centers, convention center hotels, etc. And even in the United States, public-private partnerships are not new. The New York subway is one of the most notable public-private partnership transactions when it was first built in New York City. It was done using a public-private partnership methodology. So what should you know about public-private partnerships by way of definition? There are 5 components to a true public-private partnership. They are design, build, operate, maintain, and finance. And those 5 components you will find in what is a textbook P3. The design component, typically government will have an issue that it needs to resolve. It will hire what is often referred to as a consortium. And a consortium is a group of companies that come together with different expertise, and they will address both the designing of the solution, and that designing could include the designing of a bridge, the designing of a water and sewer treatment plant, the designing of a roadway, the designing of a convention center. And a build component, which is exactly what it suggests. It's the construction of the improvement, whatever it is. And then after the design and building of the improvement, there is a discussion about the operation of that improvement and the role that the parties will play. And during the operation of the completed improvement, there are maintenance obligations that flow from that. And each of the 4 components I just mentioned obviously have to be paid for, and how that is financed is the 5th component of the public-private partnership. And within those 5 components, what makes a public-private partnership unique is the allocation of risk between the private sector and the public sector within each of those 5 components. There is no one allocation that defines a public-private partnership. Each one is different depending on the risk that either side, the public or private side, is taking, and the obligations that are imposed on either side. So when you're talking about a public-private partnership, it's important to understand you're not going to be handed a set of documents and say this is what the public-private partnership deal looks like. It is a deal that involves a complete understanding of who's going to take what risk within each of those 5 components, and there's no single answer, and many times there's no single transaction that you can look to say this is the model and every subsequent deal of its type will match that model. I mention that because as home builders, oftentimes there's a certain way in which business is done. There's a certain consistency within the marketplace in how deals are structured, and that won't necessarily be the case in a public-private partnership that home builder industry developer might participate in. And I'll just share with you some nomenclature so that if you find yourself in a public-private partnership discussion, you can at least say that I understand these terms. So you've heard me use public-private partnership and P3 interchangeably. Sometimes people refer to it as the 3 Ps, but the proper term, P3. Second, you may also hear someone refer to a D-bomb. And the first few times you hear it, you will not quite understand what they're referring to in the context of a P3. But a D-bomb is a design, build, operate, maintain, DBOM. And you'll hear the reference to D-bomb with a small f or a big F, and the F obviously stands for the financing component. And in the industry, in the P3 industry, there continues to be discussions about the type of D-bomb a particular deal is, or whether how the financing will flow. And I'm just sharing that so that if you hear it referenced, you'll know what people are referring to when they're talking about a P3. The last thing I'll share with respect to public-private partnerships in general is that oftentimes for a successful P3 to go from the conceptual stage to the implementation stage, the time involved in understanding the parties' objectives, it can be significant. And obviously significant is a very subjective term. It really depends on each party's participation and tolerance and patience, which I'll often refer to as the sort of 6th P that you need to have in each of those 5 elements, a significant amount of patience when dealing with government. But understanding that if you don't spend the time up front understanding government's tolerance in each of those 5 areas, or government doesn't spend the time understanding the private sector's tolerance and risk tolerance within each of those 5 areas, it oftentimes will not lead to a successful P3 project. And the way from the private sector side to determine and assess whether this is an opportunity worth pursuing really will fall on your ability to analyze how much time has government spent understanding precisely what it wants and precisely the questions it needs answered by the private sector. Because whenever we have seen government simply issue a request for proposal or an invitation to bid or request for qualifications with little or no studying that preceded its issuance. And the private sector responds with all types of responses to that solicitation. It usually ends up in no project at all, because by the time the 5 or 6 or 10 responses come in, the ability to compare apples to apples when government is starting with a lack of understanding of what it needs is nearly impossible. So assessing how much time has been spent by government on the front end, what expertise they either have in-house or have engaged in the finance area, because P3s and how they are financed are more unique than the typical government contracting exercise. Having subject matter expertise being in the type of project that government is seeking to construct. They need to have industry expertise in roadways or in transportation or in hospitality, and in this particular case in residential projects or products, so they understand exactly how that industry works. And then the legal expertise in negotiating public-private partnerships, partnership agreements, because when you're dealing with a consortium of companies that typically come together to respond to the solicitation, there is a expertise that oftentimes does not reside within the municipal attorney's office that will help expedite the process if it is found either internally or externally. And those are the types of factors you want to look at before you go down the path of responding to a particular opportunity. Now, lastly, it's important to fully understand that the structuring of public-private partnerships is not only different in each model, but when it comes to the home building industry, I will tell you that you might not find much information that is useful if you only looked at P3s in the context of roadway projects or major infrastructure projects and asked yourself, how are those structured and how would that apply to me? Rather, there are a few projects that just want to point to that I think can be of interest in the home building industry. So at this point, I'm going to spend more time on your industry and what the opportunities are within the P3s, and then I'll come back to a little bit more general conversation. Now, I have stated that typically you find yourself responding to government solicitations, and you will have to assess the research that government has done and the resources that government has at its fingertips to evaluate a response to a solicitation. But there's another way to enter the public-private partnership arena, and this is where the creativity of the private sector, and in particular the home building industry, can become a larger player in the P3 space, and that is by submitting what is referred to as an unsolicited proposal, where you are looking at government assets and underutilized government assets. You're thinking about the product that you build and whether or not there's a way to monetize a particular underutilized government asset in a way that allows you to advance your residential product and provide government with revenue that it currently is not receiving in a way that government may not have considered and therefore never issued a solicitation. So I'm teasing you a little bit because I want to talk about that at the end when I talk about some of the ways in which you can offer government a solution. So I want you to stay tuned as I now walk you through some of the projects that have been very successful, residential developments, and what they look like around the country. So from a residential standpoint, I'm going to first talk about colleges and universities. Many colleges and universities throughout the nation are obviously public institutions, oftentimes creatures of state government, and therefore are ripe parties to seek out the private sector support in addressing their residential needs on campus. And there have been a number of residential projects that have been built both in the U.S. And in Canada that can be looked at as examples for successful residential P3 projects. For example, the University of Georgia P3 project. A campus living consortium entered into a $517 million project to build new student housing that will total roughly 3 million square feet across 9 University of Georgia campuses. And again, it's something that many of the home builders, many in the home building industry may not have considered. How do I get into the student housing market? And if you have considered it, what does that look like? And I'm going to walk you through this particular project so that you can get some idea of how it was structured. Under the arrangement, the University System of Georgia selected a consortium to develop, construct, manage, and maintain the project. Again, you go back to the 5 components of the P3. The operations period is for 65 years. So you have an arrangement that goes beyond the revenue opportunities in the design, build, and development component, but also the manage and maintenance revenue opportunities post-construction for a 65-year period. The contract does include performance-based fees that are paid to the consortium, a reinvestment account that is projected to exceed $2 billion over the life of the contract, and $5.6 million upfront funding by the consortium for capital repairs and renovations. The contract methodology was a design, build, finance, operate, and maintain, and the funding sources included a $5.6 million upfront investment by the consortium and other private sector institutional lenders. And the current status is the deal is expected to close in 2015, this year. In Kansas City, the Kansas University P3, the University of Kansas, they plan to build a multi-use facility on campus in Lawrence, Kansas. The Central District Development Project consists of 260,000 square feet of academic science facilities, 150,000 square feet of student union space, and 2 housing facilities with about 1,200 student beds and parking to support the new facilities. So again, you're in the home building industry. You are addressing residential development needs in the communities where you exist. This is a mixed-use development that includes a residential component. And as you put together your consortium of companies or partners, you would look for development partners and operators that can assist you in each of the components of what the University of Kansas is looking for. Now, the specifics, the University of Kansas took an approach where they issued a request for qualifications for the planning, design, construction, financing, and potentially operating and maintaining the new project in Kansas. The University of Kentucky also has a P3 project scheduled for completion in 2017. And University Flats will be composed of a 7-story building in the University of Kentucky's Lexington campus, and the building will have about 312 apartment units and will be designed to provide separate living communities for upper-level undergraduate, graduate, and professional students. And under this arrangement, the private partner will provide financing, oversee development and construction, and will be responsible for maintenance and management. And the University of Kentucky will provide resident life services. And so you have just a few examples I just wanted to give of university and college P3 projects that have a residential component or are residential communities that are being constructed for the needs that that particular university have. And as you are probably aware, there have always been ongoing privatization or P3 opportunities with the military and military housing. And there is an ongoing military housing privatization initiative with the Department of Defense. Need over the next 20 years the private sector to help with $16 billion of residential projects that are to be constructed over a period of time. Now, there also, I would say, in the home building industry, there are many home builders that buy undeveloped land and bank that land to address needs that they believe the community will have in the future. And sometimes, as a home builder, you will develop that land, and other times you'll sell it to others because you don't believe that your investment horizon and the return on that investment will meet the needs of that community or will be aligned with the needs of that community within the time frame that you have established internally. And what we have seen take place, some creativity in the P3 market, and I'll give one example, and it includes the FBI facility in Washington, D.C., the Herbert Hoover building, where the Herbert Hoover FBI facility continued to be an underutilized federal government asset in a very prime location, real estate location. And a developer, or developers actually, responded to an opportunity to build a new facility for the federal government in another location in exchange for the right to develop or have the development rights and the right to have the current Herbert Hoover building. I keep saying Herbert Hoover, I mean J. Edgar Hoover, the other Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover building. And Ultimately, a deal was reached for an exchange of property that will result in the design and construction of a new FBI facility for the federal government, and in exchange, the development rights for the private sector developer in the current location of the J. Edgar Hoover building. I share that because for those who say, I'm not really interested in participating in a public process and trying to evaluate whether or not government has done the proper assessment, but I do believe that I can look at current government locations. Maybe that is a better location for a residential product, maybe a high-rise product of some sort. And I'm going to approach government with an unsolicited proposal, a way in which I can provide a revenue stream for government that it currently does not have, or move government to a more desirable location for government, turn that non-income producing property, a property that is not being taxed in many cases by government, and therefore no tax revenue, into a revenue stream the government currently does not have, and allow me to develop a project in a location, a government-owned location, in exchange for providing government with a need that it might have. So I share the J. Edgar Hoover example as a creative way around the nation to engage with state and local government entities as members of the home building industry to bring your private sector expertise, your recognition as you drive through streets and see a post office or a library or another government facility that you know is in a prime location, and that as development trends have unfolded in your community, that's probably better used for another use. And there's nothing in many jurisdictions that prohibits the offering of a solution on an unsolicited basis to government. Now, I know that during the introduction it was shared with you that I am a member of Bills and Sundberg, and we have, as a firm, have been engaged in many real estate development projects, some that are considered joint development projects or mixed-use projects, some of which are with government, many of which do not involve a government component. But what we have seen is we've been able to use our experience as a firm in representing many in the home builder industry to bring to bear their experience and expertise and match that with our robust government practice in responding to government's RFPs or invitations to bid, and really put together a team or consortium that has been able to provide both the private sector the return on investment it's looking for, and the public sector the product and increased, or I'll call it increased tax base, or monetizing an underutilized asset in a way that really is a win-win opportunity for both. So when I say that government, or I'll say the private sector, when assessing whether government has the right expertise in-house or through consulting arrangements to assess the responses to a solicitation that it might receive, it's equally important that the private sector also have the right expertise to respond to those solicitation requests or to put together an unsolicited proposal that takes into account what government typically is looking for, how that might be financed, and what manner how you should proceed in offering your particular solution. So with that, I want to thank you all for taking out the time to participate. Wanted to at least whet your appetite. There's always more that can be offered, and we can always drill down in more detail with respect to the various types of products and projects that exist for home builders to pursue. And I'm always open to an inquiry. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.